Chapter 4 of Commentary on Galatians by St. John Chrysostom, translated by Gross Alexander. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Verses 1 through 3. But I say that so long as the heir is a child, he differeth nothing from a bondservant, though he is Lord of all, but is under guardians and stewards, until the term appointed of the father. So we also, when we were children, were held in bondage under the rudiments of the world. The word child in this place denotes not age, but understanding, meaning that God had from the beginning designed for us these gifts. But as we yet continued childish, He let us be under the elements of the world, that is, new moons and Sabbaths. For these days are regulated by the course of sun and moon. If then also now they bring you under law, they do nothing else but lead you backward, now in the time of your perfect age and maturity. And see what is the consequence of observing days. The Lord, the master of the house, the sovereign ruler, is thereby reduced to the rank of a servant. Verses 4 and 5. But when the fullness of the time came, God sent forth His Son, born of a woman, under the law, that He might redeem them which were under the law, that we might receive the adoption of sons. Here he states two objects and effects of the Incarnation: deliverance from evil, and supply of good things which none could compass but Christ. They are these: deliverance from the curse of the law, and promotion to sonship. Fitly does he say, that we might receive, be paid, implying that it was due. For the promise was of old time made for these objects to Abraham, as the Apostle has himself shown at great length. And how does it appear that we have become sons? He has told us one mode, in that we have put on Christ, who is the Son. And now he mentions another, in that we have received the Spirit of adoption. Verses 6 and 7. And because ye are sons, God sent forth the Spirit of His Son into your hearts, crying, Abba, Father. So that thou art no longer a bondservant, but a son. And if a son, then an heir through God. Had not we been first made sons, we could not have called Him Father. If then grace hath made us free men instead of slaves, men instead of children, heirs and sons instead of aliens, is it not utter absurdity and stupidity to desert this grace, and to turn away backwards? Verses 8 and 9. Howbeit at that time, not knowing God, ye were bondage to them which by nature are no gods. But now that ye have come to know God, or rather to be known of God, how ye turn back again to the weak and beggarly rudiments, whereunto ye desire to be in bondage over again? Here, turning to the Gentile believers, he says that it is an idolatry, this rigid observance of days, and now incurs a severe punishment. To enforce this, and inspire them with a deeper anxiety, he calls the elements not by nature gods. And his meaning is, then indeed as being benighted and bewildered ye lay grovelling upon the earth, but now that ye have known God, or rather are known of Him, how great and bitter will be the chastisement ye draw upon you, if, after such a treatment, ye relapse unto the same disease. It was not by your own pains that ye found out God, but while ye continued in error, He drew you to Himself. He says, weak and beggarly rudiments, in that they avail nothing towards the good things held out to us. Verse 10. Ye observe days and months and seasons and years. Hence is plain that their teachers were preaching to them not only circumcision, but also the feast days and new moons. Verse 11. I am afraid of you, lest by any means I have bestowed labor upon you in vain. Observe the tender compassion of the Apostle. They were shaken, and he trembles and fears. And hence he has put it so as thoroughly to shame them. I have bestowed labor upon you, saying, as it were, make not vain the labors which have cost me sweat and pain. By saying, I fear, and subjoining the word lest, he both inspires alarm and encourages good hope. He says not, I have labored in vain, but lest, which is as much as to say, the wreck has not happened, but I see the storm big with it, so I am in fear, yet not in despair. Ye have the power to set all right, and to return into your former calm. Then, as it were stretching out a hand to them thus tempest-tossed, he brings himself into the midst, saying, verse 12, I beseech you, brethren, be as I am, for I am as you are. This is addressed to his Jewish disciples, and he brings his own example forward to induce them thereby to abandon their old customs. Though you had none other for a pattern, he says, to look at me only would have sufficed for such a change, and for your taking courage. Therefore gaze on me. I too was once in your state of mind, especially so. I had a burning zeal for the law, yet afterwards I feared not to abandon the law, to withdraw from that rule of life. And this ye know full well, how obstinately I clung hold of Judaism, and how with yet greater force I let it go. He does well to place this last in order. For most men, though they are given 1,000 reasons, and those just ones, are more readily influenced by that which is like their own case, and more firmly hold to that which they see done by others. Verse 12, Ye did me no wrong. Observe how he again addresses them by a title of honor, which was a reminder, moreover, of the doctrine of grace. Having chid them seriously, and brought things together from all quarters, and shown their violations of the law, and hit them on many sides, he gives in, and conciliates them, speaking more tenderly. For as to do nothing but conciliate causes negligence, so to be constantly talked at with sharpness sours a man, so that it is proper to observe due proportion everywhere. See then how he excuses to them what he has said, and shows that it proceeded not simply because he did not like them, but from anxiety. After giving them a deep cut, he pours in this encouragement like oil, and showing that his words were not words of hate or enmity, he reminds them of the love which they have evinced toward him, mixing his self-vindication with praises. Therefore he says, Ye did me no wrong. Verses 13 and 14. But ye know that because of an infirmity of the flesh I preached the gospel unto you the first time, and that which was a temptation in my flesh ye despised not, nor rejected. Not to have injured one is indeed no great thing, for no man whatever would choose to hurt wantonly and without object to annoy another who had never injured him. But for you, not only have ye not injured me, but ye have shown me great and inexpressible kindness, and it is impossible that one who has been treated with such attention should speak thus from any malevolent motive. My language then cannot be caused by ill will. It follows that it proceeds from affection and solicitude. Ye did me no wrong. Ye know that because of an infirmity of the flesh I preached the gospel unto you. What can be gentler than this holy soul? What sweeter and more affectionate? And the words he had already used arose not from an unreasoning anger, nor from a passionate emotion, but from much solicitude. And why do I say, Ye have not injured me? Rather have ye evinced a great and sincere regard for me. For ye know, he says, that because of an infirmity of the flesh I preached the gospel unto you, and that which was a temptation to you in my flesh ye despised not nor rejected. What does he mean? While I preached to you I was driven about, I was scourged, I suffered 1,000 deaths, yet ye thought no scorn of me. For this is meant, by that which was a temptation to you in my flesh ye despised not, nor rejected. Observe his spiritual skill in the midst of his self-vindication. He again appeals to their feelings, by showing what he had suffered for their sakes. This, however, says he, did not at all offend you, nor did ye reject me on account of my sufferings and persecutions. Or, as he now calls them his infirmity and temptation. Verse 14. But ye received me as an angel of God. Was it not then absurd in them to receive him as an angel of God when he was persecuted and driven about, and then not to receive him when pressing on them what was fitting? Verse 15 and 16. Where then is that gratulation of yourselves? For I bear you witness, that, if possible, ye would have plucked out your eyes and given them to me. So then am I become your enemy, because I tell you the truth? Here he shows perplexity and amazement, and desires to learn of themselves the reason of their change. Who, says he, hath deceived you, and caused a difference in your disposition towards me? Are ye not the same who attended and ministered to me, counting me more precious than your own eyes? What then has happened? Whence this dislike? Whence this suspicion? Is it because I have told you the truth? You ought on this very account to pay me increased honor and attention, instead of which I am become your enemy, because I tell you the truth. For I can find no other reason but this. Observe, too, what humbleness of mind appears in his defense of himself. He proves not by his conduct to them, but by theirs to him, that his language could not possibly have proceeded from unkind feeling. For he says not, how is it supposable that one who has been scourged and driven about and ill-treated 1,000 times for your sake should now have schemes against you? But he argues from what they had reason to boast of, saying, how can one who has been honored by you and received as an angel repay you by conduct the very opposite? Verse 17. They zealously seek you in no good way, nay, they desire to shut you out, that ye may seek them. It is a wholesome emulation, which leads to an imitation of virtue, but an evil one which seduces from virtue him who is in the right path. And this is the object of those persons who would deprive you of perfect knowledge, and impart to you that which is mutilated and spurious, and this for no other purpose than that they may occupy the rank of teachers, and degrade you, who now stand higher than themselves, to the position of disciples. For this is the meaning of the words, that ye may seek them. But I, says he, desire the reverse, that ye may become a model for them, and a pattern of a higher perfection, a thing which actually happened when I was present with you. Wherefore he adds, verse 18, but it is good to be zealously sought in a good matter at all times, and not only when I am present with you. Here he hints that his absence had been the cause of this, and that the true blessing was for disciples to hold right opinions not only in the presence, but also in the absence of their master. But as they had not arrived at this point of perfection, he makes every effort to place them there. Verse 19. My little children, of whom I am again in travail, until Christ be formed in you. Observe his perplexity and perturbation. Brethren, I beseech you, my little children, of whom I am again in travail. He resembles a mother trembling for her children. Until Christ be formed in you. Behold his paternal tenderness. Behold this despondency worthy of an apostle. Observe what a wail he utters, far more piercing than of a woman in travail. Ye have defaced the likeness, ye have destroyed the kinship, ye have changed the form, ye need another regeneration and refashioning. Nevertheless, I call you children, abortions and monsters though ye be. However, he does not express himself in this way, but spares them, unwilling to strike and to inflict wound upon wound. Wise physicians do not cure those who have fallen into a long sickness all at once, but little by little, lest they should faint and die. And so is it with this blessed man, for these pangs were more severe in proportion as the force of his affection was stronger, and the offense was of no trivial kind. And as I have ever said and ever will say, even a slight fault mars the appearance and distorts the figure of the whole. Verse 20. Yea, I could wish to be present with you now, and to change my voice. Observe his warmth, his inability to refrain himself, and to conceal these his feelings. Such is the nature of love. Nor is he satisfied with words, but desires to be present with them, and so, as he says, to change his voice, that is, to change to lamentation, to shed tears, to turn every thing into mourning. For he could not by letter show his tears or cries of grief, and therefore he ardently desires to be present with them. Verse 20. For I am perplexed about you. I know not, says he, what to say, or what to think. How is it that ye who by dangers, which ye endured for the faith's sake, and by miracles which ye performed through faith, had ascended to the highest heaven, should suddenly be brought to such a depth of degradation as to be drawn aside to circumcision or Sabbaths, and should rely wholly upon Judaizers? Hence in the beginning he says, I marvel that ye are so quickly removing, and here, I am perplexed about you, as if he said, what am I to speak? What am I to utter? What am I to think? I am bitterly perplexed. And so he must needs weep, as the prophets do when in perplexity. For not only admonition, but mourning also is a form in which solicitous attention is often manifested. And what he said in his speech to those at Miletus, by the space of 3 years I ceased not to warn every one with tears, he says also here, and to change my voice. Acts 20:31. When we find ourselves overcome by perplexity and helplessness, which come contrary to expectation, we are driven to tears. And so Paul admonished them sharply, and endeavored to shame them, then in turn soothed them, and lastly he wept. And this weeping is not only a reproof, but a blandishment. It does not exasperate like reproof, nor relax like indulgent treatment, but is a mixed remedy, and of great efficacy in the way of exhortation. Having thus softened and powerfully engaged their hearts by his tears, he again advances to the contest, and lays down a larger proposition, proving that the law itself was opposed to its being kept. Before, he produced the example of Abraham, but now, what is more cogent, he brings forward the law itself enjoining them not to keep itself, but to leave off. So that, says he, you must abandon the law if you would obey it, for this is its own wish. This, however, he does not say expressly, but enforces it in another mode, mixing up with it an account of facts. Verse 21. Tell me, says he, ye that desire to be under the law, do ye not hear the law? He says rightly, ye that desire, for the matter was not one of a proper and orderly succession of things, but of their own unseasonable contentiousness. It is the book of creation which he here calls the law, which name he often gives to the whole Old Testament. Verse 22. For it is written, Genesis 15:16, that Abraham had 2 sons, one by the handmaid, and the other by the free woman. He returns again to Abraham, not in the way of repetition, but inasmuch as the patriarch's fame was great among the Jews, to show that the types had their origin from thence, and that present events were pictured aforetime in him, having previously shown that the Galatians were sons of Abraham. Now, in that the patriarch's sons were not of equal dignity, one being by a bondwoman, the other by a free woman, he shows that they were not only his sons, but sons in the same sense as he that was free-born and noble. Such is the power of faith. Verse 23. Howbeit, the son of the handmaid is born after the flesh, but the son of the free woman is born through promise. What is the meaning of after the flesh? Having said that faith united us to Abraham, and it having seemed incredible to his hearers that those who were not begotten by Abraham should be called his sons, he proves that this paradox had actually happened long ago. For that Isaac, born not according to the order of nature, nor the law of marriage, nor the power of the flesh, was yet truly his own son. He was the issue of bodies that were dead, and of a womb that was dead. His conception was not by the flesh, nor his birth by the seed, for the womb was dead both through age and barrenness. But the Word of God fashioned him. Not so in the case of the bondman. He came by virtue of the laws of nature, and after the manner of marriage. Nevertheless, he that was not according to the flesh was more honorable than he that was born after the flesh. Therefore let it not disturb you that ye are not born after the flesh, for from the very reason that ye are not so born are ye most of all Abraham's kindred. The being born after the flesh renders one not more honorable, but less so. For a birth not after the flesh is more marvelous and more spiritual. And this is plain from the case of those who were born of old time. Ishmael, for instance, who was born according to the flesh, was not only a bondman, but was cast out of his father's house. But Isaac, who was born according to the promise, being a true son and free, was Lord of all. Verse 24, which things contain an allegory. Contrary to usage, he calls a type an allegory. His meaning is as follows. This history not only declares that which appears on the face of it, but announces somewhat farther, whence it is called an allegory. And what hath it announced? No less than all the things now present. Verse 24, for these women, he says, are two covenants, one from Mount Sinai, bearing children unto bondage, which is Hagar. These, who? The mothers of those children, Sarah and Hagar. And what are they? Two covenants, two laws. As the names of the women were given in the history, he abides by this designation of the two races, showing how much follows from the very names. How from the names? Verse 25. Now this Hagar is Mount Sinai in Arabia. The bondwoman was called Hagar, and Hagar is the word for Mount Sinai in the language of that country. So that it is necessary that all who are born of the old covenant should be bondmen, for that mountain where the old covenant was delivered hath a name in common with the bondwoman, and it includes Jerusalem, for this is the meaning of verse 25, and answereth to Jerusalem that now is. That is, it borders on and is contiguous to it. Verse 25, for she is in bondage with her children. What follows from hence? Not only that she was in bondage and brought forth bondmen, but that this covenant is so too, whereof the bondwoman was a type. For Jerusalem is adjacent to the mountain of the same name with the bondwoman, and in this mountain the covenant was delivered. Now where is the type of Sarah? Verse 26, but Jerusalem that is above is free. Those therefore who are born of her are not bondmen. Thus the type of the Jerusalem below was Hagar, as is plain from the mountain being so called. But of that which is above is the church. Nevertheless, he is not content with these types, but adds the testimony of Isaiah to what he has spoken. Having said that Jerusalem which is above is our mother, and having given that name to the church, he cites the suffrage of the prophet in his favor. Verse 27, rejoice, thou barren that bearest not, break forth and cry, thou that travailest not, for more are the children of the desolate than of her which hath the husband. Isaiah 54, verse 1. Who is this who before was barren and desolate? Clearly it is the church of the Gentiles, that was before deprived of the knowledge of God. Who? She which hath the husband. Plainly the synagogue. Yet the barren woman surpassed her in the number of her children. For the other embraces one nation, but the children of the church have filled the country of the Greeks and of the barbarians, the earth and sea, the whole habitable world. Observe how Sarah by acts, and the prophet by words, have described the events about to befall us. Observe too, that he whom Isaiah called barren, Paul hath proved to have many children, which also happened typically in the case of Sarah. for she too, although barren, became the mother of a numerous progeny. This, however, does not suffice Paul, but he carefully follows out the mode whereby the barren woman became a mother, that in this particular likewise the type might harmonize with the truth. Wherefore, he adds, verse 28, Now we, brethren, as Isaac was, are children of promise. It is not merely that the church was barren like Sarah, or become a mother of many children like her, but she bore them in the way Sarah did, as it was not nature, but the promise of God which rendered Sarah a mother. For the word of God which said, At the time appointed I will return unto thee, and Sarah shall have a son, Genesis 18:14, this entered into the womb and formed the babe. So also in our regeneration it is not nature, but the words of God spoken by the priest, the faithful know them, which in the bath of water, as in a sort of womb, form and regenerate him who is baptized. Wherefore, if we are sons of the barren woman, then we are free. But what kind of freedom, it might be objected, is this, when the Jews seize and scourge the believers, and those who have this pretense of liberty are persecuted? For these things then occurred in the persecution of the faithful. Neither let this disturb you, he replies. This also is anticipated in the type. For Isaac, who was free, was persecuted by Ishmael the bondman. Wherefore he adds, verses 29 and 30, But as then he that was born of the flesh persecuted him that was born after the Spirit, even so it is now. Howbeit, what saith the Scripture? Genesis 21:10, Cast out the handmaid and her son. For the son of the handmaid shall not inherit with the son of the free woman. What? Does all this consolation consist in showing that freemen are persecuted by bondmen? By no means, he says. I do not stop here. Listen to what follows. And then, if you be not pusillanimous under persecution, you will be sufficiently comforted. And what is it that follows? Cast out the son of the handmaid, for he shall not inherit with the son of the free woman. Behold the reward of tyranny for a season, and of recklessness out of season. The son is cast out of the father's house, and becomes, together with his mother, an exile and a wanderer. And consider too the wisdom of the remark, for he says not that he was cast forth merely because he persecuted, but that he should not be heir. For this punishment was not exacted from him on account of his temporary persecution, for that would have been of little moment, and nothing to the point. But he was not suffered to participate in the inheritance provided for the son. And this proves that, putting the persecution aside, this very thing has been typified from the beginning, and did not originate in the persecution, but in the purpose of God. He does not say, the son of Abraham shall not be heir, but the son of the handmaid, distinguishing him by his inferior descent. Now Sarah was barren, and so is the Gentile church. Observe how the type is preserved in every particular, as the former, through all the bygone years, conceived not, and in extreme old age became a mother. So the latter, when the fullness of time is come, brings forth. And this the prophets have proclaimed, saying, Rejoice, thou barren that bearest not. Break forth and cry, thou that travailest not. For more are the children of the desolate than of her which hath the husband. And hereby they intend the church. For she knew not God, but as soon as she knew him, she surpassed the fruitful synagogue. Verse 31. Wherefore, brethren, we are not children of a handmaid, but of a free woman. He turns and discusses this on all sides, desiring to prove that what had taken place was no novelty, but had been before typified many ages ago. How then can it be otherwise than absurd for those who had been set apart so long, and who had obtained freedom, willingly to subject themselves to the yoke of bondage? Next, he states another inducement to them to abide in his doctrine. End of chapter 4. Recording by Jonathan Lang. Chapter 5. of Commentary on Galatians by St. John Chrysostom, translated by Gross Alexander. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Verse 1. With freedom did Christ set us free. Stand fast, therefore. Have ye wrought your own deliverance, that ye run back again to the dominion ye were under before? It is another who hath redeemed you. It is another who hath paid the ransom for you. Observe in how many ways he leads them away from the error of Judaism, by showing first that it was the extreme of folly for those who had become free instead of slaves to desire to become slaves instead of free. Secondly, that they would be convicted of neglect and ingratitude to their benefactor in despising him who had delivered and loving him who had enslaved them. Thirdly, that it was impossible for another, having once for all redeemed all of us from it, the law ceases to have any sway. By the word stand fast he indicates their vacillation. Verse 1. And be not entangled again in a yoke of bondage. By the word yoke he signifies to them the burdensomeness of such a course, and by the word again he points out their utter senselessness. Had ye never experienced this burden, ye would not have deserved so severe a censure. But for you who by trial have learnt how irksome this yoke is, again to subject yourself to it is justly unpardonable. Verse 2. Behold, I, Paul, say unto you, that if ye receive circumcision, Christ will profit you nothing. Lo, what a threat! Reasonably then did he anathematize even angels. How then shall Christ profit them nothing? For he has not supported this by argument, but only declared it, the credence due to his authority compensating, as it were, for all subsequent proof. Wherefore he sets out by saying, Behold, I, Paul, say unto you, which is the expression of one who has confidence in what he asserts. We will subjoin what we can ourselves, as to how Christ shall profit nothing them who are circumcised. He that is circumcised for fear of the law, and he who fears the law distrusts the power of grace, and he who distrusts can receive no benefit from that which is distrusted. Or again thus, he that is circumcised makes the law of force, but thus considering it to be of force, and yet transgressing it in the greater part while keeping it in the lesser, he puts himself again under the curse. But how can he be saved who submits himself to the curse, and repels the liberty which is of faith? If one may say what seems a paradox, such an one believes neither Christ nor the law, but stands between them, desiring to benefit both by one and the other, whereas he will reap fruit from neither. Having said that Christ shall profit them nothing, he lays down the proof of it shortly and sententiously thus. Verse 3. Yea, I testify again to every man that receiveth circumcision, that he is a debtor to do the whole law. That you may not suppose that this is spoken from ill will, I say not to you alone, he says, but to every one who receiveth circumcision, that he is a debtor to do the whole law. The parts of the law are linked one to the other. As he who from being free has enrolled himself as a slave, no longer does what he pleases, but is bound by all the laws of slavery, so in the case of the law, if you take upon a small portion of it and submit to the yoke, you draw down upon yourself its whole domination. And so it is in a worldly inheritance. He who touches no part of it is free from all matters which are consequent on the heirship to the deceased. But if he take a small portion, though not the whole, yet by that part he has rendered himself liable for everything. And this occurs in the law, not only in the way I have mentioned, but in another also, for legal observances are linked together. For example, circumcision has sacrifice connected with it, and the observance of days. Sacrifice, again, has the observance both of day and of place. Place has the details of endless purifications. Purifications involve a perfect swarm of manifold observances. For it is unlawful for the unclean to sacrifice to enter the holy shrines, to do any other such act. Thus the law introduces many things even by the one commandment. If then thou art circumcised, but not on the 8th day, or on the 8th day, but no sacrifice is offered, or a sacrifice is offered, but not in the prescribed place, or in the prescribed place, but not the accustomed objects, or if the accustomed objects, but thou be unclean, or if clean, yet not purified by proper rules, everything is frustrated. Wherefore he says that he is a debtor to the whole law. Fulfill not a part, but the whole, if the law is of force. But if it be not of force, not even a part. Verse 4. Ye are severed from Christ, ye who would be justified by the law, ye are fallen away from grace. Having established his point, he at length declares their danger of the severest punishment. When a man recurs to the law which cannot save him, and falls from grace, what remains but an inexorable retribution, the law being powerless, and grace rejecting him? Thus having aggravated their alarm, and disquieted their mind, and shown them all the shipwreck they were about to suffer, he opens to them the haven of grace, which was near at hand. This is ever his wont, and he shows them in this quarter salvation is easy and secure, subjoining the words, verse 5, For we through the Spirit of faith wait for the hope of righteousness. We need none of those legal observances, he says. Faith suffices to obtain for us the Spirit, and by him righteousness, and many and great benefits. Verse 6, For in Jesus Christ neither circumcision availeth anything, nor uncircumcision, but faith working through love. Observe the great boldness with which he now encounters them. Let him that hath put on Christ, he says, no longer be careful about such matters. Having before said that circumcision was hurtful, how is it that he now considers it indifferent? It is indifferent as to those who had it previously to the faith, but not as to those who are circumcised after the faith was given. Observe, too, the view in which he places it, by setting it by the side of uncircumcision. It is faith that makes the difference. As in the selection of wrestlers, whether they be hook-nosed or flat-nosed, black or white, is of no importance in their trial. It is only necessary to seek that they be strong and skillful. So all these bodily accidents do not injure one who is to be enrolled under the new covenant, nor does their presence assist him. What is the meaning of working through love? Here he gives them a hard blow, by showing that this error had crept in because the love of Christ had not been rooted within them. For to believe is not all that is required, but also to abide in love. It is as if he had said, Had ye loved Christ as ye ought, ye would not have deserted to bondage, nor abandoned him who redeemed you, nor treated with contumely him who gave you freedom. Here he also hints at those who have plotted against them, implying that they would not have dared to do so had they felt affection towards them. He wishes, too, by these words, to correct their course of life. Verse 7, Ye were running well, who did hinder you? This is not an interrogation, but an expression of doubt and sorrow. How hath such a course been cut short? Who hath been able to do this? Ye who were superior to all in the rank of teachers, have not even continued in the position of disciples. What has happened? Who could do this? These are rather the words of one who is exclaiming and lamenting, as he said before, Who did bewitch you? Galatians 3:1. Verse 8, This persuasion came not of him that calleth you. He who called you not to such fluctuations. He did not lay down a law that you should Judaize. Then, that no one might object, Why do you thus magnify and aggravate the matter by your words? One commandment only of the law have we kept, and yet you make this great outcry. Hear how he terrifies them, not by things present, but future, in these words, Verse 9, a little leaven leaveneth the whole lump. And thus this slight error, he says, if not corrected, will have power, as the leaven has with the lump, to lead you into complete Judaism. Verse 10, I have confidence to you ward in the Lord, that ye will be none otherwise minded. He does not say, ye are not minded, but ye will not be minded, that is, ye will be set right. And how does he know this? He says not, I know, but I trust in God, and invoking His aid in order to your correction, I am in hopes. And he says not merely, I have confidence in the Lord, but I have confidence towards you in the Lord. Everywhere he connects complaint with his praises. Here it is as if he had said, I know, my disciples, I know your readiness to be set right. I have good hopes, partly because of the Lord who suffers nothing, however trivial, to perish, partly because of you who are quickly to recover yourselves. At the same time he exhorts them to use diligence on their own parts, it not being possible to obtain aid from God if our own efforts are not contributed. Verse 10, but he that troubleth you shall bear his judgment, whosoever he be. Not only by words of encouragement, but by uttering a curse or a prophecy against their teachers, he applies to them an incentive. And observe that he never mentions the name of these plotters, that they might not become more shameless. His meaning is as follows: not because ye will be none otherwise minded are the authors of your seduction relieved from punishment. They shall be punished, for it is not proper that the good conduct of the one should become an encouragement to the evil disposition of the other. This is said that they might not make a second attempt upon others. And he says not merely, he that troubleth, but whosoever he be, in the way of aggravation. Verse 11, but I, brethren, if I still preach circumcision, why am I still persecuted? Observe how clearly he exonerates himself from the charge that in every place he Judaized and played the hypocrite in his preaching. Of this he calls them as witnesses. For ye know, he says, that my command to abandon the law was made the pretext for persecuting me. If I still preach circumcision, why am I still persecuted? For this is the only charge which they of the Jewish descent have to bring against me. Had I permitted them to receive the faith, still retaining the customs of their fathers, neither believers nor unbelievers would have laid snares for me, seeing that none of their own usages were disturbed. What then? Did he not preach circumcision? Did he not circumcise Timothy? Truly he did. How then can he say, I preach it not? Here observe his accuracy. He says not, I do not perform circumcision, but I preach it not. That is, I do not bid men so to believe. Do not therefore consider it any confirmation of your doctrine, for though I circumcised, I did not preach circumcision. Verse 11, then hath the stumbling block of the cross been done away. That is, if this which ye assert be true, the obstacle, the hindrance is removed. For not even the cross was so great an offense to the Jews, as the doctrine that their fathers' customs ought not to be obeyed. When they brought Stephen before the council, they said not that this man adores the crucified, but that he speaks against this holy place and the law. Acts 6:13. And it was of this they accused Jesus, that he broke the law. Wherefore Paul says, if circumcision be conceded, the strife you are involved in is appeased. Hereafter no enmity to the cross and our preaching remains. But why do they bring this charge against us, while waiting day after day to murder us? It is because I brought an uncircumcised man into the temple, Acts 21:29, that they fell upon me. Am I then, he says, so senseless, after giving up the point of circumcision, vainly and idly to expose myself to such injuries, and to place such a stumbling block before the cross? For ye observe that they attack us for nothing with such vehemence as about circumcision. Am I then so senseless as to suffer affliction for nothing at all, and to give offense to others? He calls it the offense of the cross, because it was enjoined by the doctrine of the cross, and it was this which principally offended the Jews, and hindered their reception of the cross, namely, the command to abandon the usages of their fathers. Verse 12. I would that they which unsettle you would even cut themselves off. Observe how bitterly he speaks here against their deceivers. At the outset he directed his charge against those who were deceived, and called them foolish once and again. Now, having sufficiently corrected and instructed them, he turns to their deceivers. And you should remark his wisdom in the manner in which he admonishes and chastens the former as his own children, and as capable of receiving correction, but their deceivers he cuts off as aliens and incurably depraved. And this he does partly when he says, He shall bear his judgment whosoever he be, partly when he utters the imprecation against them, I would that they which unsettle you would even cut themselves off. And he says well, that unsettle you. For they had compelled them to abandon their own fatherland, their liberty, and their heavenly kindred, and to seek an alien and foreign one. They had cast them out of Jerusalem which is above and free, and compelled them to wander forth as captives and emigrants. On this account he curses them, and his meaning is as follows: For them I have no concern. A man that is heretical after the first and second admonition refuse. Titus 3:10. If they will, let them not only be circumcised, but mutilated. Where then are those who dare to mutilate themselves, seeing that they draw down the apostolic curse, and accuse the workmanship of God, and take part with the Manichees? For the latter call the body a treacherous thing, and from the evil principle; and the former by their acts give countenance to these wretched doctrines, cutting off the member as being hostile and treacherous. Ought they not much rather to put out the eyes? For it is through the eyes that desire enters the soul. But in truth neither the eye nor any other part of us is to blame, but the depraved will only. For if you will not allow this, why do you not mutilate the tongue for blasphemy, the hands for rapine, the feet for their evil courses, in short, the whole body? For the ear enchanted by the sound of a flute hath often enervated the soul, and the perception of sweet perfume by the nostrils hath bewitched the mind, and made it frantic for pleasure. Yet this would be extreme wickedness and satanic madness. The evil spirit, ever delighting in slaughter, hath seduced them to crush the instrument, as if its maker had erred, whereas it was only necessary to correct the unruly passion of the soul. How then does it happen, one may say, that when the body is pampered, lust is inflamed? Observe here too, that it is the sin of the soul. For to pamper the flesh is not an act of the flesh, but of the soul. For if the soul choose to mortify it, it would possess absolute power over it. But what you do is just the same thing as if one seeing a man lighting a fire, and heaping on fuel, and setting fire to a house, were to blame the fire instead of him who kindled it, because it had caught this heap of fuel, and risen to a great height. Yet the blame would attach not to the fire, but to the one who kindled it. For it was given for the purpose of dressing food, affording light, and other like ministries, not for burning houses. In like manner desire is implanted for the rearing of families and the ensuring of life, not for adultery, or fornication, or lasciviousness, that a man may become a father, not an adulterer, a lawful husband, not a seducer, leaving heirs after him, not doing damage to another man's. For adultery rises not from nature, but from wantonness against nature, which prescribes the use, not the misuse. These remarks I have not made at random, but as a prelude to a dispute, as skirmishing against those who assert that the workmanship of God is evil, and who, neglecting the sloth of the soul, madly inveigh against the body, and traduce our flesh, whereof Paul afterwards discourses, accusing not the flesh, but devilish thoughts. Verse 13. For ye, brethren, were called for freedom, only use not your freedom for an occasion to the flesh. Henceforward he appears to digress into a moral discourse, but in a new manner, which does not occur in any other of his epistles. For all of them are divided into two parts, and in the first he discusses doctrine, in the last the rule of life. But here, after having entered upon the moral discourse, he again unites with it the doctrinal part. For this passage has reference to doctrine in the controversy with the Manichees. What is the meaning of use not your freedom for an occasion to the flesh? Christ hath delivered us, he says, from the yoke of bondage. He hath left us free to act as we will, not that we may use our liberty for evil, but that we may have ground for receiving a higher reward, advancing to a higher philosophy. Lest any one should suspect, from his calling the law over and over again a yoke of bondage, and a bringing on of the curse, that his object in enjoining an abandonment of the law was that one might live lawlessly, he corrects this notion, and states his object to be, not that our course of life might be lawless, but that our philosophy might surpass the law. For the bonds of the law are broken. And I say this, not that our standard may be lowered, but that it may be exalted. For both he who commits fornication and he who leads a virgin life pass the bounds of the law, but not in the same direction. The one is led away to the worse, the other is elevated to the better. The one transgresses the law, the other transcends it. Thus Paul says that Christ hath removed the yoke from you, not that ye may prance and kick, but that though without the yoke ye may proceed at a well measured pace. And next he shows the mode whereby this may be readily effected. And what is this mode? He says, verse 13, but through love be servants one to another. Here again he hints that strife and party spirit, love of rule and presumptuousness, had been the causes of their error. For the desire of rule is the mother of heresies. By saying, be servants one to another, he shows that the evil had arisen from this presumptuous and arrogant spirit, and therefore he applies a corresponding remedy. As your divisions arose from your desire to domineer over each other, serve one another. Thus will ye be reconciled again. However, he does not openly express their fault, but he openly tells them its corrective, that through this they may become aware of that. As if one were not to tell an immodest person of his immodesty, but were continually to exhort him to chastity. He that loves his neighbor as he ought, declines not to be a servant to him more humbly than any servant. As fire brought into contact with wax easily softens it, so does the warmth of love dissolve all arrogance and presumption more powerfully than fire. Wherefore he says not, love one another merely, but be servants one to another, thus signifying the intensity of the affection. When the yoke of the law was taken off them, that they might not caper off and away, another was laid on, that of love, stronger than the former, yet far lighter and pleasanter. And to point out the way to obey it, he adds, verse 14, for the whole law is fulfilled in one word, even this, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. Seeing that they made so much of the law, he says, if you wish to fulfill it, do not be circumcised, for it is fulfilled not in circumcision, but in love. Observe how he cannot forget his grief, but constantly touches upon what troubled him, even when launched into his moral discourse. Verse 15, but if ye bite and devour one another, take heed that ye be not consumed one of another. That he may not distress them, he does not assert this, though he knew it was the case, but mentions it ambiguously. For he does not say, inasmuch as ye bite one another, nor again does he assert in the clause following, that they shall be consumed by each other, but take heed that ye be not consumed one of another. And this is the language of apprehension and warning, not of condemnation. And the words which he uses are expressly significant. He says not merely, ye bite, which one might do in a passion, but also, ye devour, which implies a bearing of malice. To bite is to satisfy the feeling of anger, but to devour is a proof of the most savage ferocity. The biting and devouring he speaks of are not bodily, but of a much more cruel kind. For it is not such an injury to taste the flesh of man as to fix one's fangs in his soul. In proportion as the soul is more precious than the body, is damage to it more serious. Take heed that ye be not consumed one of another. For these who commit injury and lay plots do so in order to destroy others. Therefore he says, take heed that this evil fall not on your own heads. For strife and dissensions are the ruin and destruction, as well of those who admit as of those who introduce them, and eats out everything worse than a moth does. Verse 16. But I say, walk by the Spirit, and ye shall not fulfill the lust of the flesh. Here he points out another path which makes duty easy, and secures what had been said, a path whereby love is generated, and which is fenced in by love. For nothing, nothing, I say, renders us so susceptible of love as to be spiritual, and nothing is such an inducement to the Spirit to abide in us as the strength of love. Therefore he says, walk by the Spirit, and ye shall not fulfill the lust of the flesh. Having spoken of the cause of the disease, he likewise mentions the remedy which confers health. And what is this? What is the destruction of the evils we have spoken of, but the life of the Spirit? Hence, he says, walk by the Spirit, and ye shall not fulfill the lust of the flesh. Verse 17. For the flesh lusteth against the Spirit, and the Spirit against the flesh. For these are contrary the one to the other, that ye may not do the things that ye would. Here some may make the charge that the Apostle has divided man into two parts, and that he states the essence of which he is compounded to be conflicting with himself, and that the body has a contest with the soul. But this is not so, most certainly. For by the flesh he does not mean the body. If he did, what would be the sense of the clause immediately following? For it lusteth, he says, against the Spirit. Yet the body moves not, but is moved, is not an agent, but is acted upon. How then does it lust? For lust belongs to the soul, not to the body. For in another place it is said, my soul longeth, Psalm 84:2. And whatsoever thy soul desireth, I will even do it for thee, 1 Samuel 20:4. And walk not according to the desires of thy heart, and so panteth my soul, Psalm 42:1. Wherefore then does Paul say, the flesh lusteth against the Spirit? He is wont to call the flesh not the natural body, but the depraved will, as where he says, but ye are not in the flesh, but in the Spirit, Romans 8:8-9. And again, they that are in the flesh cannot please God. What then? Is the flesh to be destroyed? Was not he who thus spoke clothed with flesh? Such doctrines are not of the flesh, but from the devil. For he was a murderer from the beginning, John 8:44. What then is his meaning? It is the earthly mind, slothful and careless, that he here calls the flesh. And this is not an accusation of the body, but a charge against the slothful soul. The flesh is an instrument, and no one feels aversion and hatred to an instrument, but to him who abuses it. For it is not the iron instrument, but the murderer whom we hate and punish. But it may be said that the very calling of the faults of the soul by the name of the flesh is in itself an accusation of the body. And I admit that the flesh is inferior to the soul, yet it too is good. For that which is inferior to that which is good may itself be good, But evil is not inferior to good, but opposed to it. Now, if you are able to prove to me that evil originates from the body, you are at liberty to accuse it. But if your endeavor is to turn its name into a charge against it, you ought to accuse the soul likewise. For he that is deprived of the truth is called the natural man, 1 Corinthians 2:14, and the race of demons, the spirits of wickedness, Ephesians 6:12. Again, the Scripture is wont to give the name of the flesh to the mysteries of the Eucharist, and to the whole Church, calling them the body of Christ, Colossians 1:24. Nay, to induce you to give the name of blessings to the things of which the flesh is the medium, you have only to imagine the extinction of the senses, and you will find the soul deprived of all discernment, and ignorant of what it before knew. For if the power of God is since the creation of the world clearly seen, being perceived through the things that are made, Romans 1:20, how could we see them without eyes? And if faith cometh of hearing, Romans 10:17, how shall we hear without ears? And preaching depends on making circuits wherein the tongue and feet are employed. For how shall they preach except they be sent? Romans 10:15. In the same way writing is performed by means of the hands. Do you not see that the ministry of the flesh produces for us 1,000 benefits? In this expression, the flesh lusteth against the Spirit, he means two mental states. For these are opposed to each other, namely, virtue and vice, not the soul and the body. Were the two latter so opposed, they would be destructive of one another, as fire of water, and darkness of light. But if the soul cares for the body, and takes great forethought on its account, and suffers 1,000 things in order not to leave it, and resists being separated from it, and if the body too ministers to the soul, and conveys to it much knowledge, and is adapted to its operations, how can they be contrary and conflicting with each other? For my part, I perceive by their acts that they are not only not contrary, but closely accordant and attached one to another. It is not therefore of these that he speaks as opposed to each other, but he refers to the contest of bad and good principles. Compare Romans 7:23. To will and not to will belongs to the soul. Wherefore he says, these are contrary the one to the other, that you may not suffer the soul to proceed in its evil desires. For he speaks this like a master and teacher in a threatening way. Verse 18. But if ye are led by the Spirit, ye are not under the law. If it be asked, in what way are these two connected? I answer, closely and plainly. For he that hath the Spirit as he ought quenches thereby every evil desire. And he that is released from these needs no help from the law, but is exalted far above its precepts. He who is never angry, what need has he to hear the command, Thou shalt not kill? He who never casts unchaste looks, what need hath he of the admonition, Thou shalt not commit adultery? Who would discourse about the fruits of wickedness with him who had plucked up the root itself? For anger is the root of murder, and of adultery the inquisitive gazing into faces. Hence he says, If ye are led by the Spirit, ye are not under the law, wherein he appears to me to have pronounced a high and striking eulogy of the law, if at least the law stood according to its power in the place of the Spirit before the Spirit's coming upon us. But we are not on that account obliged to continue apart with our schoolmaster. Then we were justly subject to the law, that by fear we might chasten our lusts, the Spirit not being manifested. But now that grace is given, which not only commands us to abstain from them, but both quenches them and leads us to a higher rule of life, what more need is there of the law? He who has attained an exalted excellence from an inner impulse has no occasion for a schoolmaster, nor does any one, if he is a philosopher, require a grammarian. Why then do ye so degrade yourselves, as now to listen to the law, having previously given yourselves to the Spirit? Verses 19, 20, 21. Now the works of the flesh are manifest, which are these: fornication, uncleanness, lasciviousness, idolatry, sorcery, enmities, strife, jealousies, wrath, factions, divisions, heresies, envyings, drunkenness, revellings, and such like, of the which I forewarn you, even as I did forewarn you, that they which practice such things shall not inherit the kingdom of God. Answer me now, thou that accusest thine own flesh, and supposest that this is said of it as of an enemy and adversary. Let it be allowed that adultery and fornication proceed, as you assert, from the flesh. Yet hatred, variance, emulations, strife, heresies, and witchcraft, these arise merely from a depraved moral choice. And so it is with the others also. For how can they belong to the flesh? You observe that he is not here speaking of the flesh, but of earthly thoughts, which trail upon the ground. Wherefore also he alarms them by saying that they which practice such things shall not inherit the kingdom of God. If these things belonged to nature, and not to a bad moral choice, his expression, they practice, is inappropriate. It should be, they suffer. And why should they be cast out of the kingdom? For rewards and punishments relate not to what proceeds from nature, but from choice. Verse 22. But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace. He says not the work of the Spirit, but the fruit of the Spirit. Is the soul, however, superfluous? The flesh and the Spirit are mentioned, but where is the soul? Is he discoursing of beings without a soul? For if the things of the flesh be evil, and those of the Spirit good, the soul must be superfluous. By no means. For the mastery of the passions belongs to her, and concerns her, and being placed amid vice and virtue, if she has used the body fitly, she has wrought it to be spiritual. But if she separate from the Spirit, and give herself up to evil desires, she makes herself more earthly. You observe throughout that his discourse does not relate to the substance of the flesh, but to the moral choice, which is or is not vicious. And why does he say the fruit of the Spirit? It is because evil works originate in ourselves alone, and therefore he calls them works. But good works require not only our diligence, but God's loving kindness. He places first the root of these good things, and then proceeds to recount them in these words: love, joy, peace, long-suffering, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, meekness, temperance. Against such there is no law. For who would lay any command on him who hath all things within himself, and who hath love for the finished mistress of philosophy? As horses, who are docile and do everything of their own accord, need not the lash, so neither does the soul, which by the Spirit hath attained to excellence, need the admonitions of the law. Here too he completely and strikingly casts out the law, not as bad, but as inferior to the philosophy given by the Spirit. Verse 24. And they that are of Christ Jesus have crucified the flesh with its passions and lusts thereof. That they might not object, and who is such a man as this? He points out by their works those who have attained to this perfection, here again giving the name of the flesh to evil actions. He does not mean that they had destroyed their flesh, otherwise how were they going to live? For that which is crucified is dead and inoperative. But he indicates the perfect rule of life. For the desires, although they are troublesome, rage in vain. Since then such is the power of the Spirit, let us live therein and be content therewith, as he adds himself, verse 25, if we live by the Spirit let us also walk. Being governed by his laws, for this is the force of the words, let us walk, that is, let us be content with the power of the Spirit, and seek no help from the law. Then, signifying that those who would fain have introduced circumcision were actuated by ambitious motives, he says, verse 26, let us not be vainglorious, which is the cause of all evils, provoking one another to contentions and strife, envying one another. For from vainglory comes envy, and from envy all these countless evils. End of chapter 5. Recording by Jonathan Lang. Chapter 6 of Commentary on Galatians by St. John Chrysostom, translated by Gross Alexander. Verse 1. Brethren, even if a man be overtaken in any trespass, forasmuch as under cover of a rebuke they gratified their private feelings, and, professing to do so for faults which had been committed, were advancing their own ambition, he says, Brethren, if a man be overtaken. He said not, if a man commit, but if he be overtaken, that is, if he be carried away. Ye which are spiritual, restore such a one. He says not, chastise, nor judge, but set right. Nor does he stop here, but in order to show that it behooved them to be very gentle towards those who had lost their footing, he subjoins, in a spirit of meekness. He says not, in meekness, but in a spirit of meekness, signifying thereby that this is acceptable to the Spirit, and that to be able to administer correction with mildness is a spiritual gift. Then, to prevent the one being unduly exalted by having to correct the other, he puts him under the same fear, saying, looking to thyself, lest thou also be tempted. For as rich men convey contributions to the indigent, that, in case they should be themselves involved in poverty, they may receive the same bounty, so ought we also to do. And therefore he states this cogent reason in these words, looking to thyself, lest thou also be tempted. He apologizes for the offender, first by saying, if ye be overtaken, next by employing a term indicative of great infirmity, lastly by the words, lest thou also be tempted, thus arraigning the malice of the devil rather than the remissness of the soul. Verse 2. Bear ye one another's burdens. It being impossible for man to be without failings, he exhorts them not to scrutinize severely the offenses of others, but even to bear their failings, that their own may in turn be borne by others. As in the building of a house, all the stones hold not the same position, but one is fitted for a corner, but not for the foundations, another for the foundations, and not for the corner, so too is it in the body of the church. The same thing holds in the frame of our own flesh, notwithstanding which the one member bears with the other, and we do not require everything from each, but what each contributes in common constitutes both the body and the building. Verse 2. And so fulfill the law of Christ. He says not fulfill, but complete, that is, make it up all of you in common, by the things wherein ye bear with one another. For example, this man is irascible, thou art dull-tempered. Bear therefore with his vehemence, that he in turn may bear with thy sluggishness. And thus neither will he transgress, being supported by thee, nor wilt thou offend in the points where thy defects lie, because of thy brother's forbearing with thee. So do ye, by reaching forth a hand one to another, when about to fall, fulfill the law in common, each completing what is wanting in his neighbor by his own endurance. But if ye do not thus, but each of you will investigate the faults of his neighbor, nothing will ever be performed by you as it ought. For as in the case of the body, if one were to exact the same function from every member of it, the body could never consist. So must there be great strife among brethren, if we were to require all things from all. Verse 3. For if a man thinketh himself to be something when he is nothing, he deceiveth himself. Here again he reflects on their arrogance. He that thinks himself to be something is nothing, and exhibits at the outset a proof of his worthlessness by such a disposition. Verse 4. But let each man prove his own work. Here he shows that we ought to be scrutinizers of our lives, and this not lightly, but carefully to weigh our actions, as, for example, if thou hast performed a good deed, consider whether it was not from vainglory, or through necessity, or malevolence, or with hypocrisy, or from some other human motive. For as gold appears to be bright before it is placed in the furnace, but when committed to the fire is closely proved, and all that is spurious is separated from what is genuine, so too our works, if closely examined, will be distinctly made manifest, and we shall perceive that we have exposed ourselves to much censure. Verse 4: And then shall he have his glorying in regard of himself alone, and not of his neighbor. This he says, not as laying down a rule, but in the way of concession. And his meaning is this: boasting is senseless. But if thou wilt boast, boast not against thy neighbor, as the Pharisee did. For he that is so instructed will speedily give up boasting altogether. And therefore he concedes a part, that he may gradually extirpate the whole. He that is wont to boast with reference to himself only, and not against others, will soon reform this failing also. For he that does not consider himself better than others, for this is the meaning of not in regard of his neighbor, but becomes elated by examining himself by himself, will afterwards cease to be so. And that ye may be sure this is what he desires to establish, observe how he checks him by fear, saying above, Let every man prove his own work, and adding here, verse 5, For each man shall bear his own burden. He appears to state a reason prohibitory of boasting against another. But at the same time he corrects the boaster, so that he may no more entertain high thoughts of himself by bringing to his remembrance his own errors, and pressing upon his conscience the idea of a burden, and of being heavily laden. Verse 6: But let him that is taught in the word communicate unto him that teacheth in all good things. Here he proceeds to discourse concerning teachers, to the effect that they ought to be tended with great assiduity by their disciples. Now what is the reason that Christ so commanded? For this law, that they which preach the gospel should live of the gospel, 1 Corinthians 9:14, is laid down in the New Testament, and likewise in the Old, Numbers 31:47, 35, 1 through 8. Many revenues accrued to the Levites from the people. What is the reason, I say, that he so ordained? Was it not for the sake of laying a foundation beforehand of lowliness and love? For inasmuch as the dignity of a teacher oftentimes elates him who possesses it, he, in order to repress his spirit, hath imposed on him the necessity of requiring aid at the hands of his disciples. And to these in turn he hath given means of cultivating kindly feelings, by training them, through the kindness required of them to their teacher, in gentleness towards others also. But this means no slight affection is generated on both sides. Were not the cause of this what I have stated it to be, why should he, who fed the dull-minded Jews with manna, have reduced the apostles to the necessity of asking for aid? Is it not manifest he aimed at the great benefits of humility and love, and that those who were under teaching might not be ashamed of teachers who were in appearance despicable? To ask for aid bears the semblance of disgrace, but it ceased to be so when their teachers with all boldness urged their claim, so that their disciples derived from hence no small benefit, taught hereby to despise all appearances. Wherefore he says, But let him that is taught in the word communicate unto him that teacheth in all good things. That is, let him show to him all generosity. This he implies by the words, in all good things. Let the disciple, says he, keep nothing to himself, but have everything in common, for what he receives is better than what he gives, as much better as heavenly are better than earthly things. This he expresses in another place. If we sowed unto you spiritual things, is it a great matter if we shall reap your carnal things? 1 Corinthians 9:11. Wherefore he gives the procedure the name of a communication, showing that an interchange takes place. Hereby too love is greatly fostered and confirmed. If a teacher asks merely for competency, he does not by receiving it derogate from his own dignity, for this is praiseworthy, so assiduously to apply to the word as to require the aid of others, and to be in manifold poverty, and to be regardless of all the means of subsistence. But if he exceed the due measure, he injures his dignity, not by mere receiving, but by receiving too much. Then, lest the vice of the teacher should render the disciple more remiss in this matter, and he should frequently pass him by, though poor, on account of his conduct, he proceeds to say, verse 9, "And let us not be weary in well-doing." And here he points out the difference between ambition of this kind and in temporal affairs, by saying, "Be not deceived, God is not mocked. For whatsoever a man soweth, that shall he also reap. For he that soweth unto his own flesh shall of the flesh reap corruption. But he that soweth unto the Spirit shall of the Spirit reap eternal life. As in the case of seeds, one who sows pulse cannot reap corn. For what is sown and what is reaped must both be of one kind. So is it in actions. He that plants in the flesh wantonness, drunkenness, or inordinate desire shall reap the fruits of these things. And what are these fruits? Punishment, retribution, shame, derision, destruction. For of sumptuous tables and viands the end is no other than destruction, for they both perish themselves and destroy the body too. But the fruit of the Spirit is a nature not similar, but contrary in all respects to these. For consider, hast thou sown almsgiving? The treasures of heaven and eternal glory await thee. Hast thou sown temperance? Honor and reward, and the applause of angels, and a crown from the judge await thee. Verses 9 and 10. And let us not be weary in well-doing, for in due season we shall reap, if we faint not. So then, as we have opportunity, let us work that which is good toward all men, especially toward them that are of the household of faith. Lest any one should suppose that their teachers were to be cared for and supported, but that others might be neglected, he makes his discourse general, and opens the door of this charitable zeal to all. Nay, he carries it to such a height as to command us to show mercy both to Jews and Greeks, in the proper gradation indeed, but still to show mercy. And what is this gradation? It consists in bestowing greater care upon the faithful. His endeavor here is the same as in his other epistles. He discourses not merely of showing mercy, but of doing it with zeal and perseverance, for the expressions of sowing and of not fainting imply this. Then, having exacted a great work, he places its reward close at hand, and makes mention of a new and wondrous harvest. Among husbandmen, not only the sower, but also the reaper endures much labor, having to struggle with drought and dust and grievous toil. But in this case none of these exist, as he shows by the words, "For in due season we shall reap, if we faint not." By this means he stimulates and draws them on, and he also urges and presses them forward by another motive, saying, "As we have therefore opportunity, let us do good." As it is not always in our power to sow, so neither is it to show mercy. For when we have been carried hence, though we may desire it 1,000 times, we shall be able to effect nothing more. To this argument of ours, the 10 virgins, Matthew 25:1 and following, bear witness, who, although they wished it 1,000 times, yet were shut out from the bridegroom, because they had brought with them no bountiful charity. And so does the rich man who neglected Lazarus, Luke 16:19. For he, being destitute of his succor, although he wept and made many entreaties, won no compassion from the patriarch or any one else, but continued destitute of all forgiveness and tormented with perpetual fire. Therefore he says, "As we have opportunity, let us work that which is good toward all men," hereby especially also setting them free from the narrow mindedness of the Jews. For the whole of their benevolence was confined to their own race. But the rule of life which grace gives invites both land and sea to the board of charity, only it shows a greater care for its own household. Verses 11 and 12. See with how large letters I have written unto you with mine own hand. As many as desire to make a fair show in the flesh, they compel you to be circumcised. Observe what grief possesses his blessed soul, as those who are oppressed with some sorrow, who have lost one of their own kindred, and suffered an unexpected calamity, rest neither by night or day, because their grief besieges their soul. So the blessed Paul, after a short moral discourse, returns again to that former subject which chiefly disturbed his mind, saying as follows: See with how large letters I have written unto you with mine own hand. By this he signifies that he had written the whole letter himself, which was a proof of great sincerity. In his other epistles he himself only dictated, another wrote, as is plain from the epistle to the Romans, for at its close it is said, I, Tertius, who wrote the epistle, salute you. Romans 16:22. But in this instance he wrote the whole himself, and this he did by necessity, not from affection merely, but in order to remove an injurious suspicion. Being charged with acts wherein he had no part, and being reported to preach circumcision, yet to pretend to preach it not, he was compelled to write the epistle with his own hand, thus laying up beforehand a written testimony. By the expression what sized, he appears to me to signify not the magnitude, but the misshapen appearance of the letters, as if he had said, although not well skilled in writing, I have been compelled to write with my own hand to stop the mouth of these traducers. Verses 12 and 13. As many as desire to make a fair show in the flesh, they compel you to be circumcised, only that they may not be persecuted for the cross of Christ. For not even they who receive circumcision do themselves keep the law, but they desire to have you circumcised, that they may glory in your flesh. Here he shows that they suffered this not willingly, but of necessity, and affords them an opportunity of retreat, almost speaking in their defense, and exhorting them to abandon their teachers with all speed. What is the meaning of to make a fair show in the flesh? It means to be esteemed by men. As they were reviled by the Jews for deserting the customs of their fathers, they desire, says he, to injure you, that they may not have this charged against them, but vindicate themselves by means of your flesh. His object here is to show that they did not so act from respect to God. It is as if he said, this procedure is not founded in piety. All this is done through human ambition, in order that the unbelievers may be gratified by the mutilation of the faithful. They choose to offend God, that they may please men. For this is the meaning of to make a fair show in the flesh. Then, as a proof that for another reason too they are unpardonable, he again convinces them that not only in order to please others, but for their own vain glory, they had enjoined this. Wherefore he adds, that they may glory in your flesh, as if they had disciples and were teachers. And what is the proof of this? For not even they themselves, he says, keep the law. Even if they did keep it, they would incur grave censure, but now their very purpose is corrupt. Verse 14. But far be it from me to glory, save in the cross of our Lord Jesus Christ. Truly this symbol is thought despicable, but it is so in the world's reckoning and among men. In heaven and among the faithful it is the highest glory. Poverty too is despicable, but it is our boast, and to be cheaply thought of by the public is a matter of laughter to them, but we are elated by it. So too is the cross our boast. He does not say, I boast not, nor I will not boast, but far be it from me that I should, as if he abominated it as absurd, and invoked the aid of God in order to his success therein. And what is the boast of the cross? That Christ, for my sake took on him the form of a slave, and bore his sufferings for me the slave, the enemy, the unfeeling one. Yea, he so loved me as to give himself up to a curse for me. What can be comparable to this? If servants who only receive praise from their masters, to whom they are akin by nature, are elated thereby, how must we not boast when the Master, who is very God, is not ashamed of the cross which was endured for us? Let us then not be ashamed of his unspeakable tenderness. He was not ashamed of being crucified for thy sake, and wilt thou be ashamed to confess his infinite solicitude? It is as if a prisoner, who had not been ashamed of his king, should, after that king had come to the prison and himself loosed the chains, became ashamed of him on that account. Yet this would be the height of madness, for this very fact would be an especial ground for boasting. Verse 14. Through which the world hath been crucified unto me, and I unto the world. What he here calls the world is not the heaven nor the earth, but the affairs of life, the praise of men, retinues, glory, wealth, and all such things as have a show of splendor. To me these things are dead. Such an one it behooves a Christian to be, and always to use this language. Nor was he content with the former putting to death, but added another, saying, and I unto the world, thus implying a double putting to death, and saying, they are dead to me, and I to them. Neither can they captivate and overcome me, for they are dead once for all. Nor can I desire them, for I too am dead to them. Nothing can be more blessed than this putting to death, for it is the foundation of a blessed life. Verses 15 and 16. For neither is circumcision anything, nor uncircumcision, but a new creature. And as many as shall walk by this rule, peace be upon them, and mercy, and upon the Israel of God. Observe the power of the cross, to what a pitch it hath raised him. Not only hath it put to death for him all mundane affairs, but hath set him far above the old dispensation. What can be comparable to this power? For the cross hath persuaded him, who was willing to be slain and to slay others for the sake of circumcision, to leave it on a level with uncircumcision, and to seek for things strange and marvelous and above the heavens. This our rule of life he calls a new creature, both on account of what is past and of what is to come. Of what is past, because our soul, which had grown old with the oldness of sin, hath been all at once renewed by baptism, as if it had been created again. Wherefore we require a new and heavenly rule of life. And of things to come, because both the heaven and the earth, and all the creation, shall with our bodies be translated into incorruption. Tell me not then, he says, of circumcision, which now availeth nothing. For how shall it appear, when all things have undergone such a change? But seek the new things of grace. For they who pursue these things shall enjoy peace and amity, and may properly be called by the name of Israel, while they who hold contrary sentiments, although they be descended from him (Israel), and bear his appellation, have yet fallen away from all these things, both the relationship and the name itself. But it is in their power to be true Israelites, who keep this rule, who desist from the old ways, and follow after grace. Verse 17. From henceforth let no man trouble me. This he says not as though he were wearied or overpowered, he who chose to do and suffer all for his disciples' sake, he who said, be instant in season, out of season, 2 Timothy 4:2, he who said, if peradventure God may give them repentance unto the knowledge of the truth, and they may recover themselves out of the snare of the devil, 2 Timothy 2:25 and 26, how shall he now become relaxed and fall back? Wherefore does he say this? It is to gird up their slothful mind, and to impress them with deeper fear, and to ratify the laws enacted by himself, and to restrain their perpetual fluctuations. Verse 17. For I bear branded on my body the marks of Jesus. He says not, I have, but I bear, like a man priding himself on trophies and royal ensigns. Although on a second thought it seems a disgrace, yet does this man vaunt of his wounds, and like military standard bearers, so does he exult in bearing about these wounds. And why does he say this? More clearly by those wounds than by any argument, than any language do I vindicate myself, says he. For these wounds utter a voice louder than a trumpet against my opponents, and against those who say that I play the hypocrite in my teaching, and speak what may please men. For no one who saw a soldier retiring from the battle bathed in blood and with 1,000 wounds would dare to accuse him of cowardice and treachery, seeing that he bears on his body the proofs of his valor. And so ought ye, he says, to judge of me. And if any one desire to hear my defense, and to learn my sentiments, let him consider my wounds, which afford a stronger proof than these words and letters. At the outset of his epistle he evinced his sincerity by the suddenness of his conversion. At its close he proves it by the perils which tended to his conversion. Then it might be objected that he had changed his course with upright intentions, but that he had not continued in the same purpose. He produces his trials, his dangers, his stripes, as witness that he had so continued. Then, having clearly justified himself in every particular, and proved that he had spoken nothing from anger or malevolence, but had preserved his affection towards them unimpaired, he again establishes this same point by concluding his discourse with a prayer teeming with 1,000 blessings in these words. Verse 18. The grace of our Lord Jesus Christ be with your spirit, brethren. Amen. By this last word he hath sealed all that preceded it. He says not merely with you, as elsewhere, but with your spirit, thus withdrawing them from carnal things, and displaying throughout the benefices of God, and reminding them of the grace which they enjoyed, whereby he was able to recall them from all their Judaizing errors. For to have received the Spirit came not of the poverty of the law, but of the righteousness which is by faith. And to preserve it when obtained came not from circumcision, but from grace. On this account he concluded his exhortation with a prayer, reminding them of grace and the Spirit, and at the same time addressing them as brethren, and supplicating God that they might continue to enjoy these blessings, thus providing for them a twofold security. For both prayer and teaching, tending to the same thing, and together became to them as a double wall. For teaching, reminding them of what benefits they enjoyed, the rather kept them in the doctrine of the church, and prayer, invoking grace, and exhorting to an enduring constancy, permitted not the Spirit to depart from them, and he abiding in them, all the error of such doctrines as they held was shaken off like dust. End of chapter 6. Recording by Jonathan Lang. End of Commentary on Galatians by St. John Chrysostom, translated by Gross Alexander.